everyone, this is Nicki and welcome to a new episode of Design Like a Pro. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to design a calendar. This is the typical calendar that you see out and about. The only difference is that the size is slightly more unique. I like to create creative things that are not always mainstream sizes, so this is a way to do that. Think outside of the box slightly when it comes to calendars. Now, there is going to be a second part to this, and we are going to design a calendar that is more like a planner, meaning that your calendar spreads across two different pages. So this way you can see two different ways to design a calendar. We are using InDesign for this. I am using the latest version. You are free to use whatever version you have available though. Just know that when we get into the part, especially with tables, there are some newer features that make that a lot more convenient in newer versions of InDesign, but you can definitely follow along and do it in whatever version that you have available. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a preview of what we're designing. There's really three different components to this. One is the primary image, which in my mind is the most important part of a calendar aside from the actual days of the week, but that's what we have down here with two different text areas. So very, very simple. But again, calendars should be simple. They shouldn't be overdone with design because we really just have a primary reason why we're using calendars. But it is a great way to showcase artwork and photography and images that you're creating. So that is what's fun about this. Now, we have designed this with professional printing in mind, but you can definitely design these in a way that is print friendly at home, meaning that you're not scaling your images to bleed off the page where it's going to be trimmed by a professional printer. Of course, you can always do that yourself if you want to, or if you have the awesome feature of a printer at home that prints borderless, then you can get this very look. But it's super flexible, and that's the whole point of this, so that you can create calendars the way that you would like to. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to create a new document here. And I'm going to turn preview on just so that we can see what we're doing. Now, there is no right size when it comes to creating calendars. This is just one idea for you to get you thinking about how you can do this. Traditional calendars, meaning the ones that you typically buy in the store, are about 11 by 17. They may be slightly larger than that, but they're typically 11 by 17 tabloid. We are going to create something smaller. That way you have the flexibility if you want to bind it at the top and flip through it. It's just going to be a little bit smaller. Or you can print them out as cards and put them into a picture frame stand or whatever. So flexibility is awesome when it comes to design, and that is the point of this calendar today. So the size that we are going to be working with is a 4 by 6 size. So it's like a small card. So we're going to have 4 inches on the width, and notice that I'm typing inches. This is for those of you who are not in the United States, who are not using the measuring system that we have and you're using the metric system. If you just go ahead and type in what I'm typing, your InDesign is going to auto convert that to your measurements, so you don't have to change anything in your settings. And then we're going to move here to 6 inches as well. All right, and we're going to hit that, and everything else is going to stay the same, but we are going to add a bleed here because, again, I am thinking about this in terms of printing my final calendar professionally, but even if you're going to print it at home, having the bleed is not going to hurt things if you set it up in advance. So we're going to go ahead and add that 0.125 inches all the way around our document. And there you go. Now, one other thing to note is whether or not you want to have facing pages checked. In this case, it really doesn't matter. You're going to have an outer cover and a back cover and then your months in between. So you can go ahead and leave facing pages checked. But in reality, you are creating individual pages, meaning that one is not directly impacting the other. So in that case, you can leave facing pages unchecked as you work down your calendar. It is not going to really affect your document. It just affects the way that it is going to appear here. And then when you create your document at the end, you're creating individual pages anyway. So this is just a preference that I have to keep it facing pages unchecked, because in calendars, I look at each one technically separate. So this is how we're going to work on this, and know that each 4 by 6 page is an individual page of our calendar, and that's how we are going to design it. Okay. So now we basically have our calendar ready to go. It's now ready for us to design and do what we want. Since there's only 3 components to our calendar, I really think, as I always do, from the back forward, and in this case, it's going to be the image. The image is going to determine where on the page we're going to put the rest of our content. So I really want to place that first, get that exactly the way that I want it as far as size goes, and then I can place the other two items in the space that we have left. So let's go ahead and bring in an image. The fastest way to do that is to hit Command or Control D and find the image that you want to work with, and go ahead and bring that in. Now, you can see here that what happens is the image is huge, so we have to resize this. So I am going to show you a technique that actually saves you some time versus just bringing in a large image and resizing it, which you can do, but what's actually easier is to take a frame and draw it out to the size that you think you'd like your image to fit into. And so we are going to do that, and I'm going to drag it below the halfway point because I really want the image to fill the majority of this calendar. As we know, it is definitely about the images when it comes to calendars, so we do want it to fill the majority of our page. And from there, we can go ahead and hit Command D, reselect the image, and what's going to happen is it's going to place it into our frame. So now all we have to do is hit Control, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionately. All right. And then if we preview it by hitting W, you can see that was a lot faster than if we would have had to keep scaling that image to fit our frame. This way we can sort of dictate that in advance and say, hey, this is what we want for our image, at least right now. Now, if you want to have some flexibility, you can definitely take this a little bit longer and go back to Control, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, and it'll fill it. So just because you set the frame doesn't mean you're married to it. You can definitely adjust things the way that you want to and resize your document and your image that you just dropped in. So now we can see that we have some space here at the bottom for our text. And that's why I start with the biggest image first, or the biggest item first, so that I can see what I have left to do. It makes designing so much easier, and it also helps you sort of map out key areas, even if you're not 100% sure which direction you want to take when you start designing your document. So the next thing that we're going to work on is just the text for the month that we're working with. And I am a fan of modern, clean design, so I'm going to just use 3 letters in the month instead of using the entire month, because we have shorter months and longer months, and it's going to keep my designs a little bit different each time. So I really want them to be consistent from page to page. That's a design choice that I am making. So I come over here to the text tool. I'm just going to click and drag out here, and I'm going to type in January, and we definitely want to resize that and style it differently. So I am going to select it, come up here and make a rather large font here, and I want to use a sort of bold sans serif for that. This is going to create, again, very consistent text throughout all of my months. So that's why I'm choosing this particular style here. And whenever I'm working with all caps, I really like to have space between my letters. It's a little bit easier to read, and it's not so bunched together. So just a slight spacing between my letters is all that I need. And then we can go ahead and see that. Now, one thing, when I'm starting to get a lot of frames on the page, I really like to view it in overprint. It gets rid of those borders for me. Obviously, if I select it, the border comes back, but it's just a little bit cleaner for me when I design and not have everything so cluttered. And again, I can always hit W to preview what this is going to look like in print format. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of clean everything up, bring this in, and position January as so. And I need to bring it in slightly away from the edge. I like to keep everything either on. I mean, you can definitely be safe and keep it in the margin like this, but I know that as long as we're sort of around that area, we should be fine when we're printing it. So now we have that placed. So the final step here is to add in our month, and that involves working with tables. Now, in older versions of InDesign, you used to have to come over here with the text box, draw out a text box, and then create a table inside of that. Newer versions make creating tables and working with tables a lot better. So all we have to do is come over here to Table, Create Table, and be aware of the rows and the columns that we'd like to create. So we have 6 rows. that we're thinking about, we have the title row for the days of the week, and then we have 5 extra rows for the actual weeks in our month. Some months are going to have 5 weeks, some months are going to have 4 weeks. And then we have 7 columns to accommodate the days of the week. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And then now we can click and drag out our table to the space that we have. We're not being perfect here because we are definitely going to adjust this later on, but this is just a way to quickly get a table down here, and then we're going to work to adjust it. Now, the tip for you is that whenever I'm working with tables, I like to think about, and just the same way as I work from the back forward, I like to think about what's the easiest to work in the table and then work back from there. So you might immediately think, well, let's style our table, get rid of the borders or change the borders. But really, let's get the content in first because we want to see what we're doing. And I eventually, as you saw from the preview, want to remove the borders. But I will tell you that when you're working with tables and you remove the borders first, it can be a bit of a challenge trying to find those later on to fine tune the width and positioning of our content and cell. So if we're just going to work from the content back, it makes things a little quicker and a lot easier in the long run. So we know that we have days of the week first. So I am just going to work from Sunday through Saturday for my week. You are definitely free to format your calendar how you see fit. But this just means that I'm going to type in the letter, hit tab, and fill in our days of the week. All right. And notice I'm not styling anything yet. I am just getting the content in place, and then we will work on styling it after the fact. Okay, so the next step is to drop in the days of the week. And then we know that January starts on Friday. So really, we're just going to count up through the end of the month. So it starts on Friday with the 1st, and it actually ends on the 31st. So we're just going to go ahead and continue to add in our numbers here, counting up, and then just hitting tab to go through each one. Okay, and one tip is to really pay attention when you're doing this, because I have completely screwed up a month before and had to backtrack because I missed an actual number because I end up doing it so fast. So just definitely pay attention to it. Have a reference for your calendar when you're doing this to make sure that your days of the week are actually correct for 2016. And then you notice here that I am missing a row. So I'm just going to hit tab. And if you don't see it, you need to extend your text box like I do here. So now I have my extra row, then I need to add 31. Okay. And so adding tab at the end of the row is going to create another row directly below it, which makes it really quickly when you're working in your tables. Okay. So now we have the initial content in place. Now we need to format it. We obviously can see that it's coming right off the end of the page here. So we need to do some work here to make it fit and still legible. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to style the text. And by doing that, I'm going to select all of it. And then we're going to come up here, and keeping with a modern theme, I'm going to just pick a nice sans serif here. And then we are going to go ahead and decrease the size down to 9. And again, we want this to be really, really small. The emphasis is on the photo. So the text numbers don't have to be incredibly large, but they do still need to be legible. And I'm going to center align everything in the cell so it all lines up really, really nicely. And then I'm going to also align center in the cell itself. So the first one just aligned the text so it was all centered. And then the second option, center aligned it within the cell itself. That way there's equal spacing all the way around our characters. That's exactly what we want. Now, you could take this a step further. We are going to leave it black for the design, but if you would like to change the color of your text, all you have to do is come over to your swatches palette, hit the T, and change the color. By default, the square is selected, and that is going to change the color of the cell, not the text. So make sure that T is selected, and you can see here that now all of our text is a cyan color. So if we want to take it back to black, we have to hit the T again and take it back to black. Otherwise, we are going to be changing the color of the cell. So now you can see that we have a nice look going, but there's a couple of things that we need to fix, primarily being the spacing. Our 31 is coming off of the page here, so we do need to decrease the spacing between our rows and potentially our columns as well, because again, it's awfully close to the edge. So later versions of InDesign make this so much easier than older versions. You can do this in both, but in later versions, you basically just have to select your table, and when you have the arrow go up and down, hold down Shift on the last line of your table and bring it up. And you can see that we are aligning our columns equally. The spacing is equally as we bring this up, and we are not going to have to do that manually like we had to in the past. And the same thing is true for columns. It's just that your arrow is going to switch now to be left to right. And again, we can select this, bring in our columns so that they are all equally spaced. And you can see that's a very simple way to bring in our calendar now, and it fits much better in the space. We don't have the risk of it being cut off by accident. So the final step is to get rid of these borders. We've done the work. We can see what we were doing. You can see that having the borders definitely helped us as we were formatting the calendar table. But now that we have it the way that we want to, we can go ahead and get rid of them. So your borders all live under the stroke feature, and it all depends on what's selected here. Right now, we just have the outer borders selected, and we want to select all of them in order to get rid of them. So I'm just clicking, and then it turns to blue. Now all my borders are highlighted, and I need to change stroke to 0. And that is going to get rid of all of my borders. And just like anything else, if you do like your borders or you just want to change them, again, making sure that they are all selected, you can bring them back, maybe have them a little thinner. You can go ahead and change the stroke color to something else if you want to. For example, now we have magenta, right? But we don't want that. We want them to be gone for this design. So that's how we work with that. Now we can go ahead and hit preview, and we sort of have our finished design. And in preview, you can move these around a little bit and fit the space to your desire. But that's pretty much what we end up with. Now, you've done all of the hard work. When you're ready to continue working on the rest of your months, all you have to do is basically duplicate it. I would definitely recommend duplicating it. You don't have to do all of this work again. And now all you have to do is swap out your photo, change the month, and then tab through your pre-made table to change it for each month following. So now going forward, it's going to be a little quicker for you because you've done the work initially with the first month. Now, this is not a tutorial on how to create the entire calendar because a lot of it is repetitive. So we are basically say we're done here and we're ready to print. So I'm going to do one step, which is going to my master pages here. And this is setting up for my preferred way to save my PDF. And I have a tutorial all about this and setting up my go-to PDF preset. So I will link that down below, but I do need to do this step in every single document that I'm creating that I am going to send to a printer. And basically all this is doing is going to outline my text when I save my PDF. So I don't have to do this manually. It's a huge lifesaver, and it is my go-to format for creating PDFs for print. So all I need to do now is grab my rectangle tool, and I'm going to create a rectangle on my master page because I want this to appear on all of my pages. And all I'm doing is dropping the transparency to 0. And again, setting up the PDF preset is in a tutorial that you can see exactly how to do this and why you're doing this. And this needs to live on its own layer. So I'm going to come over here, create a new layer, drag it below everything, and click this square to this square so it ends up on its own layer. And I'm going to go ahead and lock it. That way, as I work through my document, I'm not accidentally going to select it. All right. That's all the setup that I have to do for this. So then when I go and I save my calendar for print, I'm going to go ahead and save it as this. Hit save. I'm going to replace it. All right. And whenever I select one of my pre-made presets, this one is my outline press quality default. It's going to trigger that preset and the feature of that transparent box here. So everything here, do not downsample, maximum. We, in this case, don't really need our marks, but we do want our bleed because we want this to bleed all the way out. Output is set to CMYK here. Advanced is what I'm using here. The transparency flattener is that extra feature that I use in my PDF presets, and it's high-res outlines. This is what attaches to the transparent rectangle I just created. And again, it's in the tutorial on how to actually create and set up your transparency flattener. It's a one-time setup, and then you can select it right in this dialog box anytime that you want to use it. And then we are ready to go, and we can go ahead and hit export, and it's going to create the PDF. Now that PDF is ready to send to a printer. But one last tip, what if you want to print this in-house and you don't have the luxury of printing borderless, meaning that you're going to have a white border around it? Well, it's very simple to set up. The only thing that you have to do is drag in your image, preferably equally on all sides here. And later versions of InDesign will kind of help you match this up. But basically, you want to go ahead and create a white border yourself. That way you're in control of how much space you want. And you want this to sort of be equal, something like that. So now I can go ahead and print this on cardstock right from my computer to my home inkjet printer. Nothing fancy. I just like it to be on cardstock because it's a little heavier. And now I can print that off. I'm not worrying about a bleed. I can do this in-house on my own. So those are two different ways that you can print this calendar. And that way, if you want to bind it at the top, you can, or you can just print them out yourself as individual cards. It's completely up to you. In part 2, like I said, we will be looking at a different format for calendar, so keep an eye out for that. That's going to take the calendar into a planner booklet format. If you have any questions about this or you struggled in an area, please leave it below in the comments. I do my best to answer everyone that I see. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of the latest and greatest, especially when part 2 comes out. Give it a thumbs up if you learn this or you're going to use this technique for your own calendars, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.